Hi everyone, welcome to episode 51 of Opening Basics. Here, let's throw out the first few moves. So looking at openings that start with e4, knight f6, the main response to e4, and c4, the main response to knight f6. So we're in some very mainstream openings here, such as the King's Indian to the Nimzo Indian, but I've been starting with some of the obscure sidelines. So last time I looked at knight c6, the Black Knight's Tango, and this time we're looking at e5, the Budapest Gambit, which is a surprisingly respectable opening. So this game we're following was played in 1896 in Budapest between Adler and Maraksi, Geza Maraksi of Maraksi Bind fame. So Maraksi has the black pieces, and he challenged Adler with this e5 move. Adler took, which is the best move, and pretty much the only move to keep an advantage for white. Knight to g4 is the main way of playing, even today. There is one variation I want to talk about here, which is knight to e4. That's another option you might see. That's called the Feyerowitz variation, and I will cover that in the next game, so I'm not going to talk about it more. I just wanted to mention that. Also, the name Feyerowitz is spelled with a J, so if you're English, you might call it Fajarowitz, or if you're Spanish, you might call it Fajarowitz, but he's German of Ukrainian descent, so Feyerowitz it is. Knight to g4, and then knight to f3. Defending the pawn with the knight is the Adler variation. The main move here, in which we will also look at in another game, is bishop to f4, defending with the bishop. This is the Rubinstein variation, and this is the one variation that allows white to try and hold on to the pawn, although black has ways of getting the pawn back even in this line. But knight to f3 gives the pawn back fairly easily. We'll see in this game. It's not possible really to hold the pawn after this. One other interesting idea here is to give the pawn back immediately with e4. This is the Alekhine variation. And after knight takes pawn, play f4, kick that knight. And the knight, the best move is knight back to c6, although the knight sometimes comes back to g6 as well. And I'm not going to talk any further about this position. I just wanted to mention that possibility in case you like the looks of this. It looks interesting to me, and it's decent in terms of the computer evaluation, a decent position for white. So something you might try to get away from the standard lines in the Maraksi. You are a bit overextended and open, so you have to play a bit carefully, watch your tactics, but with all those open lines and with your edge and development, I mean, well, black has one more piece developed than white does, but it's white's turn, and white got all these pawns in the center, so I'd have to give the edge and development to white here. So I think it's pretty good. Something I'm going to try sometime. But anyway, this game, knight f3 was played, and that's the way I most often play the Budapest Gambit. And the main response is bishop to c5 here. And you can see one of the ideas of the Budapest Gambit here, concentrating on that f2 square. So e3 to stop that. Now knight to c6, just a normal developing move, and regaining the pawn. So if black regains the pawn and has some active development, it's going to be okay. Now, white, Adler played queen to d5, not the most common move here, and actually not bad, but maybe starting to lead to trouble. The most common move here is knight to c3. Other possibilities are bishop to e2 and a3, although there's some wrinkles with this a3 move, so we will discuss that later. But in this game, queen to d5 was played. And it looks good. It's defending the pawn, which was, after all, under attack, and it's attacking the bishop. But black has a good answer in queen to e7, which Maraksi played, just getting the pawn back and defending the bishop at the same time. And notice that there's no saving this pawn anymore. This bishop is locked in behind the pawn chain. So that was kind of the point of the Rubinstein variation, is to get the bishop out before you put this pawn up so you can hold on to this. anyway, white played knight to c3. Black took the pawn, and now bishop to e2 was played. It's interesting that in this position, the computer is already suggesting queen back to d1. You know, in a way, white has fallen into black's plan a little bit by putting the queen out there and leaving it. It's still playable for white, still good for white even, but black's plan is to gain some time and activity with his pieces and chase this queen around. So black was luring that queen forward in a way to try and do that. And white has sort of gone along with black's plan. So d6, common move in this gambit. And now knight to e4 is the first actual mistake in the game. Not that knight, this knight. Knight to e4. And Moroxi seizes on this immediately. The best move here is actually, well, it's white is in a little bit of difficulty because of the exposed position of the queen, and so he has to take care to defend the c-pawn. So a playable move here is b3, then bishop to e6, and queen to d2. And this is still a game for both sides. But the move knight to e4 was played, and now bishop to e6 comes with some force. Queen runs back to d1. Now you have to be let's go ahead and it looks like black can take this pawn right away, but first black throws in this check, bishop d2, and castles. Yeah, it was this point. At this point, black can actually take the pawn and just be a pawn up, although black has to be careful about the way to take the pawn. So I just want to show the wrong way and the right way. So the wrong way to take the pawn is with the knight because of this problem. After knight takes, you don't take back right away, but instead you take the bishop. Then this knight comes here to take back, and you've got a queen check. And if this knight retreats, then this knight is hanging. The bishop and the queen are attacking it. It's only defended by the bishop. So this just wins a piece for white. So you cannot do that. And but actually you can take the other way. You can grab the pawn with the bishop. And the idea is that after bishop takes bishop, if you try the same trick, this bishop can escape with bishop takes e2, hitting the queen. And so queen has to respond. Then the knight can take here. And then, you know, there's still a queen check here, but the knight can just drop back and there's no other target for the queen out here. This is well defended, so it's not going to gain anything. So that is, so you can actually take the pawn. Moroxi didn't do that. Moroxi just, let's see, he played the bishop out. Queen went back. He played the bishop check, got bishop d2, and then he just castled on the queen side. And actually, black has a solid advantage here and goes on to win the game. I'm going to go through the rest of the game without much commentary because there's some mistakes in here, but it's already the main lesson is, you know, avoid, if you're white, avoid that early queen excursion if you can. There's plenty of alternatives, and or retreat it if you do run out there. So anyway, the rest of the game went like this, and it also illustrates some tactical ideas for black. So let's see, queen b3, knight takes f3 with a check. White's getting into trouble by not castling. Bishop takes, then d5. This is a nice move. If white takes, then black takes back. The bishop is defended by the rook and the knight, and that bishop there is forking these two pieces. It's forking the queen and the knight. The queen is attacking the knight too. So loose pieces drop off. That's it's just something that's going to not work out well. So you can't take that pawn. He tried knight to d2. Adler tried knight to d2, but then d takes c4. Knight takes c4. Rook to d3, hitting the queen, and taking advantage of the knight, which is still here. Queen runs, and now grabbing the knight. So black gets a piece anyway. After queen takes a7, knight c2 check, even more devastation, and Adler resigned. So that's the first game. Let's take a look at the next game here. The next game I wanted to look at was played in Berlin in 1930 between Willi Schlage and Kurt Richter. Richter is of Richter Rouser fame in the Sicilian. So Richter has the black pieces. Herr Schlage with the white pieces starts off with d4, knight of 6, c4, so we get the standard position, and then e5. Richter strikes out with the Budapest gambit. Now after d takes e5, instead of going knight to g4 like we saw in the previous game, Richter plays the Feyerowitz variation, puts the knight here. So this is, black is just going for activity and not worrying about getting this pawn back at all. And we'll see how this works out here. Knight to f3, logical move, and knight to c6. Now this is an interesting point where actually the computer is suggesting the best move here is bishop to b4. And what's interesting is this is, kind of a natural move to capitalize on the advanced knight here. But that check can be easily blocked. And then after developing, white can kick the bishop. And now if the bishop retreats and gets the pin broken, if the pin gets broken here, then this knight is just hanging. So this exchange is forced. And this is a position which is just very comfortable for white. White still has the extra pawn, so and white's development is fine. So even if that's technically the best move, it's not the idea that black has in playing this gambit. When you play a gambit like this, you don't want to be trading all your pieces off so quickly. So Richter, correctly I think, plays knight to c6 first, and Herr Schlage plays a3 to stop ideas of that bishop check. And now d6, and I mentioned previously that d6 is a common idea in these gambits, and we'll see some tactics associated with that in this game. So Herr Schlage took, and that's the right response. So you almost always want to take that pawn, and this turns it into a real gambit. It can be done in the other variation as well. And you just have to be careful about backfires along the D file. So, but as long as you're careful, this is actually a fine position. E3 was played here. I just want to show you, let's give a first illustration of some of the dangers. Suppose you wanted to play G3, because you have the intention of developing a bishop with the fianchetto, and then getting some pressure on this knight here, forcing black to defend. This is a fatal mistake. It's already over because knight takes f2 is a fork. Fork of the queen and the rook. So you take the knight, and then bishop takes pawn. And the king, the queen is loose. The queen is not defended, and the king can't go back to defend it because the bishop is here. So you take the bishop, but then you lose the queen. So that's 2 pieces for a queen. That's just good for black. Black goes on to win this game. So that's the kind of thing you have to watch out for. Now it's interesting that e3 actually solves that problem. If we go through the same sequence again, knight takes, king takes, bishop here, check. As long as you remember not to take the bishop, you can still step with the king here. And black has sacrificed a piece for not enough compensation, so this is good for white. So that's why e3 works. So e3, good move. Kurt continues with bishop to g4, and Herr Schlage replies bishop e2, breaking the pin. Now queen to f6, putting more pressure on the knight, and now h3. So h3 is a slight mistake. We'll see why, but queen c2 would have been a good move here. And just getting off this file in advance before a rook shows up here, and also attacking the knight, so has some activity. It is, you know, leaving this knight less defended, but it's not yet a problem. So that's a good move. h3, we'll see that the answer to h3 was castles queenside. So that's why, if h3, if black doesn't even have to respond to it, then it can't be accomplishing what you intended. But, well, this is interesting because let's count the material. Schlage decided to go in for the exchanges. So he took the bishop, knowing that he's going to lose the queen. But look, he gets one bishop there. Then we get this bishop too. That's two bishops. And then after this, we get the rook as well. So that's two bishops and a rook for a queen. And white still has an extra pawn. So just from a material basis, white is okay. But in fact, white's position is so messy that it is good for black. Black is just winning here. And Richter plays the best move here. Actually, this was the only move. The knight to e5 here is the only move that keeps that really big advantage for black, but that was it. And I'm going to go through the rest of the game kind of quickly. That was the main tactical points I wanted to show you, but there's a few more coming up, I guess. So white castles, knight takes g3, so getting one pawn back. So now the pawns are even. It's just two bishops and a rook for a queen, and these pawns are such a mess. You know, they're not going to last. Now this rook is hanging fire, but Herr Schlage is no slouch. He knows to kick the queen around first. Queen goes here, kicks it again, which is interesting. That queen decides to just run. Queen was not interested in just grabbing a pawn, but wants to make some more threats by repositioning on a better diagonal. So rook to e1. Finally, the rook has to run. Now knight to d3, and there's this fork here with the bishop. And notice the bishop here is, even though it's on the back rank, it's not defended. There's a bishop on this side and knight on this side, so nobody is defending this piece, and the rook is hanging here. So Schlage replies knight to c3, but this gives up the exchange. And then after this, Kurt goes h6. So the material is equal now, but black is still attacking. And by equal, I mean it's, let's see, we've got a rook and a knight. Rook and a knight. So yeah, it's three pieces for a queen. It's two bishops and a knight for the queen, which is technically equal, and the pawns are equal, but black is still attacking, and this is just a winning position for black. So anyway, Schlage took here, then queen d4 check, the king runs. And you know, this looks scary because this rook can break through here, but the bishop is still defending that pawn, so it's not going to happen so quickly. Kurt creeps in with the queen, covering squares around the king. Let's see, so knight to f3, trying to, I guess, defend some squares. Now knight to f1 check, the king steps back, and then knight to e3. And knight to e3 is critical because it blocks the bishop's view of this pawn. So bishop takes knight, queen takes knight was played, and now knight to d5. But Kurt doesn't bother to move the queen. He just plays rook takes h6 check. And at this point, Herr Schlage decided to give up. I mean, there's still moves here. I don't think it's an immediate mate. The king has no squares, but the rook can go there. Yeah, maybe there's no way to defend after the queen comes here. The king has to start running, and and white will lose at least the knight. So anyway, it's all over at this point, and white decided to resign. So let's check out the next game. Next, we're going to look at some modern games. So this game was played in 2021 between two top-rated grandmasters, 2600 and up. With the white pieces, we have Zhang, and with the black pieces, we have Pavel Ponkratov. This was played in a blitz tournament, so maybe it's not got the same degree of accuracy, but of course these grandmasters all know their opening, so they can blitz out the opening moves pretty well. So we get, we get d4, of course, knight f6, c4, e5, the same old position, d takes e5, knight g4. So we're back to the main line in the Budapest gambit, and once again we see the Adler variation. And now bishop to c5, e3, knight to c6, knight to c6, and then a3. So this game I included as an illustration of potential difficulties with a3. I think I mentioned already that you can play bishop to d2 here, or you can, let's back up a move. You can play in this position instead of a3, you can play bishop to d2 or knight to c3, and they're still fine for white, but a3 was played here, and this is okay too, but it just leads to some interesting complications, you might say. So a5 is the response. This is to stop or slow down the move b5, which is what you want to play as white to kick this bishop back. You want to get in b4 rather. You want to get in b4 with tempo and then get the bishop here. And with this pawn on a5, you don't get to do that. So playing b3 is pretty natural, and now the bishop can come to b2 at least. Black castles, and white played bishop e2. Now the book move here actually is bishop b2 instead of bishop e2. The book move is bishop to b2, and the computer has an interesting suggestion of knight to c3 in this position. Also seems to be good for white. Bishop to e2 is okay too, and maybe Jeff is getting out of book on purpose to try and make this into more of a game. So Richter e8, not just memorization of openings, I mean, but a game where both sides have to think. So Richter e8, castles, and knight takes e5. As we see, black just gets the pawn back with no trouble in these knight f3 lines. So knight takes e5, and knight takes was played. A very interesting suggestion from the computer was to pull this knight back instead, and this creates kind of a logjam for black in a way. These pieces don't have anywhere to go, and they kind of get in each other's way, but I'm not really sure. I guess the development for white is fairly straightforward here. So yeah, interesting idea. But the more natural move is taking, and certainly that's what I play almost instinctively here. But this opens up a possibility. Now bishop b2. And the possibility is this, rook to a6. So the rook lift, notice that this entire sixth row here is empty. The rook can swing all the way across the board, and does in this game. There's really nothing white can do about that. Let's see, white played knight to d2, and then rook to h6. And already, these positions, they all start out with an advantage to white, but already this has reached a position which is equal. And this resource of rook to a6 over to h6, this is something that was discovered in the 1980s and was played in many tournaments back then. So gave new life to the Budapest gambit, an interesting idea. So bishop to c3 was played, and d6. Now that the rook is out of the way, you can push the d pawn forward, open up a line for the light squared bishop. Now b4, kicking this bishop, that was the idea. And then here is where Jeff Zhang makes his mistake. He goes ahead and takes this pawn. He could pause at this moment and play a defensive move. And that would be a very good idea because the queen can come out here and line up with the rook, and it is pretty dangerous. So it seems that rook to e1 is also a playable move at this point, but he played the move b takes a5, and black responded with the queen here right away. And now it's a little bit tricky. You can't, of course mate is threatened. You can't play the knight here because knight takes knight with check, and then the queen comes in. So you can't defend with the knight. In fact, the only move is bishop takes knight. You've got to take that knight, and now the bishop can get to f3, and you are momentarily defending this pawn. So d takes, and then knight to f3. And the queen just steps back. And then the second mistake at this point, once again the computer is recommending g3. But the second mistake is queen to d5. And like we saw in the first game, it's a bit dangerous to get your queen out there and let it get kicked around. And this backfires pretty quickly. So c6, kicking the queen goes to e4, and bishop to f5, and the queen is trapped. Well, we'll see. Not entirely trapped, but can't go along this diagonal. Can't go along this diagonal. Excuse me, this diagonal. So, and then can't go up and down, and then right and left. The pawn is covering these squares, and the bishop is covering this square. So the only move for the queen is here, and this just loses a piece. Queen takes, knight takes, rook takes. So pretty quick game there. And of course, Jeff is a better player than this, but it was a blitz game. And a nice illustration of the trouble you can get into with white. So rook f to d1 he played. Bishop to c5. Rook to d2. Rook to h6. Rook to b2. Oh, the rook came over here. The bishop drops back to defend this pawn. I guess he was hoping to exploit some weakness over here, and maybe in blitz he could get away with grabbing this pawn and pushing these through. But after he saw black defending the pawn, he gave up. Black is just a pawn up, and white has no compensation. So that was that. I have one more game I want to show you. The last game I wanted to show you is another modern game. It's played in 2020, also a blitz game between Pavel Ponkratov with the white pieces and Samuel Sevian with the black pieces. Ponkratov had the black side in the previous game, so he's someone who's familiar with the black side of this variation. So interesting to see how he plays the white side. And Samuel Sevian is a grandmaster who plays the Budapest gambit quite a bit, so he's someone whose games you can check out if you are interested in seeing how the modern grandmasters play it. So this game starts off d4, knight f6, c4, e5. Samuel chooses the Budapest gambit. D takes e5, knight g4, playing the main line, and now bishop f4. So bishop f4 is the Rubinstein variation, and this is actually the main line of the Budapest gambit. It's a way for white to try and actually hold on to this pawn, although we'll see there's a wrinkle. In this position, we've already looked at the move knight to f3, the Adler variation, and there's also the move e4, the Alekhine variation. All good ways to play. But here we are, bishop f4, and knight to c6, attacking the pawn, knight to f3 defending. But actually right here is a way that there is a way for black to get that pawn back if black is really interested. So if you want to play this gambit but you want to win the pawn back after playing a few moves, there's this move g5 supported by the queen, kicking this bishop. Now the bishop can drop back to g3 trying to hold on, but even that doesn't work. Knight to c6, knight to f3, so two attackers, two defenders, but bishop g7 holds on to it. Now, I mean, bishop to g7 is going to just win that pawn. White can bring the queen out once again, but black can bring the queen out too, so black is going to stay one up in attackers. So basically, the pawn is lost at this point. So that's a way to play it, but not how this game went. And actually, the main line is to allow white to keep that pawn, just play knight c6, knight f3, and then get in this check, and ask white once again how much he wants to hold on to that pawn, because once again white can give the pawn back by playing a move like knight d2. The thing about knight d2 is it blocks the queen from coming out, so there's no possibility of defending, and then queen e7 will round up the pawn. So that's one way to hold on to it, to give it back. But we're showing the way to hold on to it here. So knight to c3 is the move you have to play if you want to keep the extra pawn. And now when queen e7 happens, you have to play queen d5. And of course, you have to stay alert, because the queen is now out and exposed, and we saw that can be trouble in the other games. And there is a price to pay for holding on to this extra pawn. Black extracts some compensation by taking that knight. And when you take back, you've got these doubled isolated c-pawns, so your extra pawn isn't looking so great. Now, the black is continuing in the main line here with f6. So white takes, black takes back with the knight, so gets the knight out of this exposed position here and kicks the queen. Queen drops back to d3. And now the move here is d6. That's the main line. And it's a little bit funny that black didn't play that. Black just castled here. And that's a mistake, because white can take that pawn. So anyway, just to show the main line goes d6, g3, castles, and bishop g2. So this is a typical position you can get out of this line of the Budapest gambit. White has an extra pawn. He hasn't castled yet, but his pieces are out, so development is decent. And the main drawback is these isolated doubled c-pawns that he has to deal with. And black is going to continue to look for active play with his pieces. Anyway, in this game, we had the kind of a funny sequence here. Castles, e3 instead of taking the pawn, and then d6. And so maybe the score was wrong, actually. It was a blitz game. Maybe they scored it incorrectly. Or maybe both players were blitzing out their moves so fast and just assumed the other player knew what they were doing in the opening, or going through their memorized moves. But it's interesting the way white played it. He's going to put the bishop on e2 instead of g2, which is also a line. You could have done that if after d6. If d6 had been played first, white could have played e3 instead of g3, as we saw in the main line, and then after castling, put the bishop here. So we could have transposed. This is a position in the opening book, in other words, just not quite the main one. So bishop g4 continues with with the opening theory. White castles, rook a to e8. I keep doing that. Rook a to e8, moving the other rook out there, and white replied with rook a to e1. Now this is where we're going to leave the main line for good. I just wanted to say the book line rather continues with h3, kicking the bishop, and I thought this was interesting because what white does in this book line is white gives up this c-pawn, one of the c-pawns, in order to get an active queen. And maybe the queen will grab on b7. It's a possibility. And disrupt these pawns over here. But at least white is getting some activity in exchange for giving the pawn back. And also, this diagonal towards the black king is open. So this is an interesting position with a slight edge for white. but certainly one that black can play as well. So if we go back in the game, white chose to play Rook A to E1. And like I said, we're just out of the book at this point. And I think, he chose to leave the opening book here in order to force his opponent to think on his toes in this blitz game, have him start burning up time on the clock. Black continued with knight to E4. And white played knight to D4. Notice this is an extra defender for the bishop. Well, the rook defends it too. Knight to C5. So this knight hops around, hits the queen again. Queen goes back to B1. And, well, I'm not going to show the rest of the game. This is about even, but the evaluation shifts back and forth between black and white. White did eventually win this game, but black had some chances as well. An interesting game. But, well, it's a blitz game, so a lot of mistakes. Anyway, that is it for this video. Let me summarize the main points here. If we go all the way back, to this point here. The first thing is taking the gambit pawn is good. You should take it. And then after knight g4, you have a choice of ways to play. You can go with knight f3, the Adler variation. You can go with bishop f4, the Rubinstein variation, or you can go with e4, the Alekhine variation. And but only bishop f4 allows you the possibility of holding onto the pawn. So if that's what you really want, then go ahead and play that. Otherwise, knight f3 is fine. And e4, although I haven't played it myself, it looked pretty interesting from a computer evaluation and from the position. So that's it. I wanted to say that the Wikipedia page has actually got a really good article on the Budapest Gambit. So in the description of this video, I'll include a pointer to that and also pointers to the first two games. The last two games I used as examples were blitz games, so I can't give you a pointer to them. But anyway, you can check out the two games that I do have pointers to. And I'll see you next time. Bye now.